Hey there, Eurobears. So this recorded slideshow is about probably one of the most iconic individuals of all European and world history, Leonardo da Vinci. Let's learn about Leonardo here. Leonardo da Vinci is considered to be a Renaissance man and the most iconic of all the Renaissance individuals. What does it mean to be a Renaissance man? A Renaissance man is an individual who has many talents in many fields. And Leonardo really was one of these individuals who's considered to be a genius, who was multi-talented. We remember him best today as being an artist, but he certainly was involved in a lot more than just art. So Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance man. It's fun to study Leonardo da Vinci today from the perspective of genius, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit as we go through this particular lecture. What made him a genius? How did his mind work? How was his mind different from yours and mine? So Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci famously was a bastard child, which meant that he was born out of wedlock, mom and dad not married, although he had a very good relationship with both mom and dad. For a particular point of time in history, and especially because of a biography written by Sigmund Freud in the early 20th century, it was thought that Leonardo had a strenuous relationship with his parents. But his parents, all the historical evidence suggests that they loved him very much. Leonardo, his name, Leonardo da Vinci, reflects his place of birth. Being born out of wedlock, he was simply Leonardo, no last name. We remember him Leonardo da Vinci because he came from the suburb of Florence, of Vinci. So as a child growing up, he wasn't allowed to go to school and spent a lot of time by himself and spent a lot of his time out in the woods of Vinci. And it's here that he began to kind of play around, experiment with things, build things, was fascinated with water, was fascinated by the natural world, really fascinated with birds and the flight of birds and how birds could fly. And he, at a very, very young age, starts drawing, and we see some of these drawings here. I mean, this is a sketch from a very, very young Leonardo, who clearly is demonstrating that he can draw the landscape of Vinci in the suburbs of Florence. And so, as he grows up, he eventually joins one of the Medici villas and becomes an apprentice to a master sculptor and painter named Verrocchio. Now, how things worked in these Medician villas was there would be the master, and you would be the apprentice coming in. And so Verrocchio would have particular assignments for Leonardo da Vinci, and if Leonardo da Vinci lived up to the assignments, well, then he got praised and he got to hang around, and eventually he might get promoted. One of Verrocchio's this is a nice bust of not Verrocchio himself, but Verrocchio's bust of Lorenzo the Magnificent, who we've learned a lot about. So this is one of the first assignments of Leonardo da Vinci. How it worked in these villas was you'd have the master painter, and in this case, the master painter is Verrocchio. And Verrocchio would do an outline of whatever needed to be painted. The patron would say, here's what I need a painting of. For example, the baptism of Christ. Here are the colors I want used. Here's what I want seen in this particular image. And the master painter would say, okay, and he would essentially plan out the painting. Usually what the master painter did was do an outline of what was going to be painted. This outline would be called a cartoon. And then the apprentices would help to paint this particular image. So what you're looking at here is really one of the first things that Leonardo da Vinci painted, but it wasn't him who did all of the painting. There were other apprentices that painted it, and Verrocchio himself painted part of it as well. But Verrocchio, when the whole thing was done and he looked at exactly what you're seeing here, he was astonished by what Leonardo da Vinci did. Now take a look at this painting. Leonardo da Vinci helped to paint one of the angels that you see there in the bottom left-hand corner to the right of Jesus. So here's a detail of that, and just take a look at the angels and the shadowing of those little angels, especially on their clothes and what they're wearing. Take a look at the folds and the shadows. And Verrocchio evidently saw this and said, "My God, I've been vanquished." In other words, the apprentice had outdone his master. And Verrocchio couldn't handle this. Verrocchio couldn't handle the fact that this teenage boy had done something better than he could do. And according to legend, Verrocchio put down his paintbrushes and never painted again. I guess this would be equivalent if one of you demonstrated that you knew history far better than I did. And I just said, I can't handle it. A teenager knows more than I do. And I just quit my job. I was humiliated. Now, Da Vinci's take on this whole situation was, as you see from this quote, Da Vinci said, "It is only the mediocre pupil who does not surpass his master." But he takes off. He's a great painter in and of himself. Now, as the 1490s roll around, Leonardo does not hang around Florence. He spent quite a bit of time in Florence growing up. Saw the Pazzi assassination attempt on the Medici brothers, if you remember that. But after Savonarola comes to power, Leonardo da Vinci flees. And this is most likely because Leonardo da Vinci himself, from what we know from the historical record, was gay. And of course, there were no room for homosexuals in Savonarola's Florence. So he took off and he went to Milan, where he appeals to the Duke of Milan for a job. Now, the Duke of Milan was an interesting man. So on the right, Milan is to the north of Florence. It's pretty much along the border of northern Italy and France. And the Duke of Milan was really very much a self-made man. He had been essentially a general, or I guess you could almost think of him as a policeman, who led a coup to take over Milan. And Da Vinci may have seen a little bit of himself in the Duke of Milan, although the Duke of Milan is this tough guy, and Leonardo da Vinci is more of an artist and a craftsman and a scientist. He saw a self-made man, a man who made himself powerful by his own wits. And Leonardo da Vinci, I think, appreciated that. But it's interesting, when Leonardo da Vinci wrote a letter asking to work for the Duke of Milan, he lists all the things that he can do. And on the top of the list, he places the stuff that he thinks the Duke is going to want to hire Leonardo da Vinci for, specifically for designing war machines. And so Leonardo da Vinci designs all of these war machines, which are very interesting to look at today. None of these things are actually going to be built or created. But here we have a scythe chariot, so that the chariot with these swinging blades can go into battle and can butcher people. It's kind of a brutal drawing if you take a look at this closely. Along with the scythe chariot, we've got the first designs for an armored car, a tank. Tanks aren't going to come into existence until 1914 in World War I. He also envisions a machine gun. Here you have a series of muskets lined up, and they could be fired one after another. So you'd have a machine gun. All these things are designed by Leonardo da Vinci. None of them are actually constructed. But he thought, well, this is how I can appeal to these men of power. I can say, look at what I can design for you so that you can help win wars. But the Duke of Milan did hire Leonardo da Vinci, and even though he didn't use him for designing war machines, he does have him paint his girlfriend, the mistress of the Duke of Milan. Here is Lady with an Ermine, and here we see some elements that are classic Da Vinci. Da Vinci himself was obsessed with particular things. He was obsessed with light and how light reflected off of material, and he spent a lot of time working with how light reflects off material and shadows, and he tries to create this perfect, very realistic image. He also is very fascinated with movement. So here we have the mistress of the Duke of Milan, and she's stroking this ermine, and the ermine seems to be in its turning or looking at something off screen here. And Leonardo da Vinci is trying to capture that. We get a sense that this thing is alive. It's very, very realistic. And then Leonardo da Vinci also attempts to capture emotion. He really wants to capture the sense of feeling that this person is experiencing. And we see that really with the Mona Lisa that we'll look at here in a moment. So here we have some of the early elements of Leonardo da Vinci. It's interesting. Da Vinci is going to move around a lot. He's going to live in Rome, Florence, Milan, Venice, and he's going to spend a lot of time, amazingly, with Cesare Borgia. This fascinates me personally because Cesare Borgia, in my opinion, is one of the most despicable people in European history. And the fact that he hired and worked with Leonardo da Vinci, and these two men were together and they discussed things, I find it absolutely fascinating. I wish I could go back in time and listen to their discussions. Now, Cesare Borgia did hire Leonardo da Vinci to help him out in warfare, and he asked Leonardo to make maps for him. So when Cesare Borgia was getting ready to sack a town, Leonardo da Vinci conceptualized an aerial image of the town so that Cesare Borgia could study it and kind of plan out where he was going to attack, where he thought the weak spots were going to be. In a day and age of Google Earth and GPS, I don't think we think that much of an image like this, but let's remember, human beings didn't get off the ground at this point in time in history. This is Leonardo da Vinci really using his imagination and having a good sense of proportion to make a map of a city like this to help Cesare Borgia out. Some other things that Leonardo da Vinci develops, when he goes to Venice, he imagines, remember Venice is filled with all these canals. He envisions a way for the Venetians to protect their city is to fight underwater. So he develops this sort of this diving bell and this scuba outfit for people to walk around underwater, and they could, if there were any boats that attacked Venice, they could fight back underwater. A very creative thinker, Leonardo da Vinci. He also has a design for the first parachute, and he has a design for a helicopter. This is the mind and the forward thinking of Leonardo da Vinci. Let's take a moment and appreciate that Leonardo da Vinci is, being the Renaissance man that he is, he's not just painting things, but he's envisioning things. He's very technical. He's very, very scientific. This was very important to Leonardo da Vinci. I want to show you this particular image because we have another aspect of Leonardo da Vinci's paintings that makes him one of the great painters of all time. This is the Virgin of the Rocks. And here we have young John the Baptist, young Jesus, Mother Mary, and John the Baptist's mom, who I believe his name is Anne. And there they are, and it's kind of a neat rocky scene in the background, and you have this extreme contrast of dark and light. You have the light coming in a dark area, this dark rocky grotto. There's been a lot of analysis of this painting in terms of the rock formation and the flowers and plants that you see growing around as being very, very accurate to stuff that would have been in Italy at the time. This element of contrast of light and dark. This is a fancy Italian word that I would like for you to know. Chiaroscuro. And I do not speak Italian very well, but that's the best I can do. Chiaroscuro. And chiaroscuro is Italian for light dark. That's literally what it means. So we have our English word clarity. Clarity is a cognate of chiaro. Chiaro is light in Italian, and scuro is something that must translate to dark. And so the nice contrast between light and dark creates mood. Leonardo da Vinci, very obsessed with light and its impact on shadows and the mood that it creates, really played around with that and creates this contrast between light and dark, which creates a particular mood. Another great example of that is this particular painting, John the Baptist. So you take a look at it, it's almost like John the Baptist was in the dark and he steps out into the light, into a limelight of some sort, and is pointing upward towards God. So here you have very clear chiaroscuro. Try to find John the Baptist's waist. It's not really there. Try to find his left shoulder. It's not really there. It's disappeared in darkness. And this extreme contrast between light and dark creates a mood for this painting. This particular painting, if I could talk a little bit more about it, Leonardo painted this near the end of his life, and there's kind of this mystery of what is John the Baptist pointing to. He's pointing up mysteriously to heaven. There's kind of there's a lot of talk about like what the symbolism of this is. Also, the model for John the Baptist was Leonardo da Vinci, one of his lifelong friends and really an apprentice and potentially lover of Leonardo da Vinci, was a young man who he nicknamed Salai, which means the little devil. Salai was a boy very similar to Leonardo. He was sort of an orphan, and Leonardo da Vinci took him in and raised him. And they were very close, and they were with each other throughout their entire life, even though Leonardo da Vinci was significantly older than Salai. Here's an image that also reflects something about Leonardo da Vinci. This image is unfinished. Leonardo da Vinci was known for his sort of moving on from one project to the next, to the next, to the next, never really completing anything. This leads some people in the late 20th and early 21st century to say that Leonardo da Vinci had something akin to ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. He was constantly on the move and couldn't finish anything. How he phrased it was like this. He said, to conceive a work is genius, but to complete it is servile. So he comes up with the idea, and then after that, just kind of gets bored with it and moves on. This is one of the most iconic images that Leonardo da Vinci ever made, and it is really also considered to be one of the most important images of the Renaissance as a whole. Here is man, the center of all things. This most likely is a self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. So there's Leonardo da Vinci drawing himself, and himself naked, obviously, here. And this image is called Vitruvian Man. So let me talk about this image for a moment. Vitruvian Man is named after Vitruvius. Vitruvius was a Roman architect, and Vitruvius had written a text on architecture on how architecture should be built to reflect the proportions of the human body. So, for example, the human head is approximately 1/8 of the length of the human body as a whole. So, the cap or roof of a building or a house should be 1/8 the height of that particular building. So, Vitruvius was an inspiration for Leonardo da Vinci. What you see here is this human being, and he is in both a square and a circle. And the square and the circle reflect this old mathematical problem of something called squaring the circle, in which you take a circle, you find the area of that circle, and then you draw a square that has the same area. And can you get the circle and the square to fit in together? Obviously, the square and the circle here do not fit in together. They're off a little bit. Looking at the human being's belly button is in the middle of the circle. It's in the middle of the circle, and it's slightly off in the middle of the square. The idea behind this is that human beings are proportionately perfect, and they fit inside a circle proportionally perfect and a square proportionally perfect. So these two important geometrical figures, the human being fits in it perfectly. Now, I probably could have done a better job of explaining that, but that's really the best I can do for Vitruvian Man. But what you have here is the image of the human being as the center of all things. And that is something that's reflected in Pico's work that we read about during the Renaissance. And this idea that human beings are special. Human beings are created in the image of God. Human beings are worth celebrating. Leonardo da Vinci himself was very interested in human proportions and really used this to help him draw and paint perfect human beings. One of the things that Leonardo da Vinci discovered, and I found this to be fascinating, after looking at and studying various human beings or people as models for his artwork, he personally recognized that the space between the top of your lip and the bottom of your nose is 1/7 of your face. So that length from the top of your lip to the bottom of your nose is 1/7 the whole length of your face. And so he used proportions like that so that he could paint people as realistically as possible. Perhaps one of the most iconic paintings that Leonardo da Vinci ever painted was this, La Gioconda, or the Mona Lisa. So there are many reasons why the Mona Lisa is fascinating, and first and foremost is the iconic smile. Leonardo da Vinci really wanted to capture emotion. And what we have with the Mona Lisa is some restraint. Some people think that she's getting ready to smile. Other people feel like she's getting ready to frown or to cry. But as you study the face of the Mona Lisa, it becomes more and more interesting, and you struggle to understand what is it that what is it that she's holding back? What is she restraining from revealing? And so that makes it one of the most iconic works. What else makes the Mona Lisa special? Well, Leonardo da Vinci had trouble completing works, and this particular work he not only completed, but he worked on several times throughout his life, touching it up and touching it up and touching it up again, and he carried it around with him. So this leads people to believe that there's something personally special about the Mona Lisa for him. And what is this? What makes it so special for him? Probably one of the most popular theories, although I don't know if there's much historical evidence behind this, is that Leonardo da Vinci was painting himself as a woman, and this is it. Some people bring Leonardo da Vinci's his sexuality into their interpretation of this painting, that he's essentially making himself a woman, and this is what he would look like if you were a woman. But maybe that's true, maybe it's not. It's simply speculation. But the Mona Lisa is considered to be one of the most important paintings of all time. And so we have to wonder why. What makes this such a spectacular painting that some people say it's the greatest thing that's ever been painted ever? Well, I mean, is it? What makes it so? The Mona Lisa, it's important to know, it's famous for being famous. Everybody knows about it. Everybody has seen it. So therefore, if asked, what's one of the most famous paintings of all time, you say the Mona Lisa. And why do you say the Mona Lisa? Well, because you've heard of the Mona Lisa. How did this painting get this reputation? Okay, so here's how the painting got this reputation. This painting is housed today in this particular building. This is the Louvre. This is the great art museum. Some people say it's the greatest art museum in the world. It's of course in downtown Paris, France. How did the Mona Lisa get in Paris, France, when Leonardo da Vinci is Italian? Well, because Leonardo da Vinci ended up living in and dying in Paris, France, with the King of France. So the Mona Lisa ends up in France, and it's now housed here. Now, when we get to the 19th century, photography is developed. When photography is developed, we now have photographs that can be used for postcards. And when there are tourists that go to the Louvre and they'll buy postcards and they'll send these postcards home to their friends all over the world. And because the Louvre has a Da Vinci, one of the very first postcards they made from a photograph was Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. And so it becomes famous now at this point in time. I mean, it's already a famous work, but now it really becomes famous. I mean, remember the 19th century, the word Renaissance comes along for the first time in the 19th century. So we have that word Renaissance, now we have photography, and now we have this postcard. And so it simply becomes famous for being famous. So if you ever go to the Louvre, you'll see thousands of paintings, amazing paintings. But everybody who goes into the Louvre wants to see one painting primarily. And that one painting is this, the Mona Lisa. So you walk into the Louvre and there's signs everywhere. This way to the Mona Lisa, this way to the Mona Lisa, this way to the Mona Lisa. And people blindly pass all this great artwork just so they could go into this room to see the Mona Lisa. I took this particular picture in 2004. You can tell it's 2004 based upon the technology that people are holding up in their hands. And you see that the Mona Lisa is on a wall by itself behind bulletproof glass. For me, it's an absolutely fascinating sociological phenomenon in terms of how people relate to art. Why are they looking at this? Why are they taking pictures of it? Well, because they feel like they have to. They're in this, they've been told the Mona Lisa is so special, it's so iconic, it's a Da Vinci, it's an original, here it is. I took this picture in 2014, 10 years later, and you look a little closer here, you see some smartphones being held up and people taking pictures there. And you get a sense of the proportion and the size of the Mona Lisa compared to the people that are there. This is the other very, very famous painting of Leonardo da Vinci's, and this is called The Last Supper. There's a whole lot we can say about The Last Supper, but I would just like to focus on the Renaissance elements of it. First of all, this is a superb example of a Renaissance painting, which, by the way, was painted on a wall, had to been touched up quite a bit since. It's in a church in Milan that you can find it. But really, it has been touched up so much that it's hard to even call this an original Da Vinci anymore. But here it is, touched up to the best of our abilities by art experts. But let's look at what we see. This is the moment where Jesus announces to his disciples that one of them is going to betray him. And emotional chaos explodes among them. So what Leonardo da Vinci is trying to capture is the emotion and the movement of this moment in biblical history. And that's what Leonardo da Vinci loves, emotion and movement. So there's the clatter, there's a discussion, who's going to betray Jesus. But so you have that realism, that is, and that emotion. That is an important aspect of Renaissance painting. But let's look at what else. We have perspective, really neat perspective. You take a look at the whatever those are, those doorways off to the side. They seem to be lined up to have a line going, directing them to the head of Jesus, where there's a vanishing point behind the head of Jesus. And then, of course, Jesus is positioned in front of a window, thus giving him a symbolic halo. So we've got vanishing point, we've got perspective, we've got realism, we have emotion, we have drama. It's an excellent, excellent example of a Renaissance painting. One of the things that makes Leonardo da Vinci extraordinarily interesting and unique is the fact that throughout his life, he kept with him a notebook. And we have thousands of pages of Leonardo's notebooks which have been preserved after his death. Because Leonardo da Vinci never went to school, he never had to learn to write right-handed. Leonardo da Vinci was left-handed. And so he just decided never to write with his right hand. Had he gone to school, his left hand most likely would have been strapped down and he'd been forced to write right-handed. So think about it. If you are right-handed, think about how you write. You pull a pen across the page. You pull a pen across the page. Now, if you're left-handed, you know how difficult it is to write in a right-hander's world because you don't pull a pen, which is the natural thing. You got to push a pen. And of course, your hand then sometimes smears the ink as you're writing, as you're going across in that particular way. So being a left-handed person, he just simply said, I'm going to write by pulling the pen. So he ended up writing backwards. So what you see here on Leonardo's notebooks it is Italian, but Italian's written backwards. So if we want to read it, we got to hold this thing up to a mirror. So thus begins, some of the big mystery about Leonardo da Vinci. Why is he writing backwards? Are there secret codes in here? Is he trying to keep things, a secret? And in part, maybe he was. He didn't want what he was designing and coming up with to be read and stolen by somebody else. So that was important for him. But one of the neatest things for me in his notebooks are the anatomical drawings. And this says a lot about Leonardo and what I personally think is his genius. So, Leonardo drew these very accurate anatomical drawings. How did he do this? He got corpses, dissected them, and drew what he saw. This is Leonardo da Vinci, and here we get an insight into the mind of Leonardo da Vinci. Would you be willing to go to a hospital, get a corpse? This is illegal at this point in time. You'd have to pay somebody off. You'd have to bribe somebody to get the corpse. Would you drag this corpse back, keep it hidden in your house, and you're probably living in a one-room studio house, and then cut open this corpse, go through it, and draw things, and think about what this would be, what your room would be like. You'd have a corpse flayed open. Think about the smell. Not many people could handle this. But this, to me, is a really good insight into the mind of Leonardo da Vinci. Disgust is nothing compared to curiosity. Curiosity trumps disgust. So he wants to know what makes us tick, almost literally, what is inside of us. And that desire to know trumps any other feelings of disgust or fears that he's doing something illegal. He simply wants to know. And I think for me personally, this is what separates geniuses from the rest of us. When I get in my car to start it up in the morning, I don't really care how my car goes, so long as it goes, so long as it works for me. I have not, gotten in my car and busted open the engine and looked at the cylinders and the spark plugs and stuff. I don't care about that. I just want the car to get me to work or wherever it is I need to go. But Leonardo da Vinci was different. He wanted to take things apart. He wanted to figure out how things work. And that insatiable curiosity is, I think, what drove Leonardo da Vinci and many, many other geniuses. He didn't mind having a corpse literally on the floor next to his bed that he'd work on and want to and draw and try to figure out. But let's take a look at some of these drawings. We have a lot of drawings of the skeletal system. We have drawings of the muscular system. We have a lot of drawings of brains, of brains, of brains. We have other drawings of the heart. Leonardo da Vinci fascinated with the heart, and he actually spent a time with a dying old man in a hospital talking to him about what he was feeling, what he was experiencing, and then the man died, and really before he was cold, Leonardo, paid off his bribe, took the man, got him home, dissected him, and looked at his heart. And Leonardo da Vinci diagnosed the death by saying, well, the arteries had been clogged up to the point where the blood couldn't pass through it. Leonardo makes the first diagnosis and discovery of what we call today arterial sclerosis. He also, I can only assume, had the corpse of a woman who was pregnant who had died and made these amazing drawings of a fetus. Leonardo ended his life in France. He was hired by the King of France to essentially be a court genius. And that's what Leonardo did when he was there with Francis I of France, a man who we'll learn a little bit more about in the next unit. Leonardo da Vinci had a stroke in his old age, and he had lost use of his hand, was unable to draw or to do artwork anymore. This had to be probably emotionally devastating for him. And he passes away in 1519, really the same year that the Reformation is just about ready to start. Leonardo da Vinci has had an incredible impact on history and has fascinated many people today, including this man, the American historian and biographer Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson is really a biographer of genius. His first major biography was on Benjamin Franklin. His second major biography was on Albert Einstein. And then this man, Steve Jobs, when he was diagnosed with cancer and was dying, contacted Walter Isaacson and asked for Walter Isaacson to talk to him, to interview him. Steve Jobs gave him all of his papers and says, I want for you to write my biography, and I want you to be as honest as possible. Steve Jobs, obviously a genius. Also, Steve Jobs, not a perfect human being. He was a man of many, many, many faults, which in some ways related to his creativity. But Walter Isaacson, when he was interviewing Steve Jobs and talking to Steve Jobs, realized that Steve Jobs was fascinated by Leonardo da Vinci, and especially da Vinci's notebooks. So after spending all this time talking to Steve Jobs about Leonardo da Vinci, Walter Isaacson's most recent book, as of the recording of this lecture, is this book, which came out a couple years ago. This is Walter Isaacson's book on Leonardo da Vinci, his most recent biography. And here's what Walter Isaacson said that Steve Jobs said to him, which gives us a little bit of insight into what makes Leonardo da Vinci very, very fascinating. Steve Jobs said, at the intersection of arts and technology, this is where creativity happens. Leonardo is the ultimate example of that. Walter Isaacson said, you couldn't have asked Leonardo if he was either a scientist or an artist. That question would not have made sense to Leonardo da Vinci because science relates to art and art relates to science. They are one and the same. And you can take Leonardo da Vinci's words for it. Leonardo da Vinci said, study the science of art, study the art of science, develop your senses, especially learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else. Only through experimentation can we know anything. And thus ends my recorded lecture here on Leonardo da Vinci. Hope you learned something, and enjoy the rest of your day.